We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 6th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Trump's tariffs ramp up against the recipients of Russian oil. We'll examine the reaction from China and India and ask how this could reshape world trade patterns. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
The first prerequisite of a democratic system is being able to defend itself. Brazil is passing that proof with flying colors. The US is failing.
We hear from the head of an intergovernmental group supporting democracy about the Trump effect and the US threats against Brazil. Plus, our correspondent in Vilnius will explain the rapid changes at the top end of Lithuania's politics and
Trump's tariffing of the blameless penguins of the Herndon McDonald Islands would once have prompted a sprint of chartered helicopters and headlines of the ilk of "Waddle they do."
We'll ask whatever happened to silly season in the news cycle. And France honours Paris's last remaining newspaper street vendor. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Tariffs of 50% on imports to the US from Brazil have kicked in, some of the highest duties imposed by the Trump administration on its trading partners. The pro-Trump right-wing politician Karol Nawrocki will be sworn in as Poland's president later today, and the UN says reports about a possible decision to expand Israel's military operations throughout the Gaza Strip are deeply alarming if true. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the art of the deal is something Donald Trump is so proud of he used it to name his autobiography. But his approach to global trade is as much about coercion and strong-arming as it is about agreement. And when geopolitics and indeed conflict enter the mix, we have instability at every turn. Well, being subject to high tariffs is currently being used by Mr. Trump to persuade the likes of India to wean itself off Russian oil. Well, will it work, or will the likes of the Brics nations take this as the moment to forge ahead as their own group? Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Charles Hecker, Russia analyst and author of Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia, and down the line from Bangalore by Maya Sharma, the journalist. A very good afternoon to you, Maya, and very good morning to you, Charles.
Good morning, Emma.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you with us. Now, Charles, let's just talk about the way that Donald Trump is using tariffs as a geopolitical tool. To what extent can we assume that tariffs are a potentially successful way of stopping Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, talk about using tariffs to somehow mediate the conflict, the war on Ukraine, is another strand in Trump's misapplication, I would say, of tariffs. He's trying to use tariffs to interfere in Brazilian domestic politics and the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro. He's been trying to use tariffs to correct what he feels are political wrongs. The way that you try to end a military conflict is through direct negotiations with the warring parties or by supplying military equipment to your ally. And the tariff approach is potentially effective, but it really is a misapplication of a type of political and economic leverage and probably won't work very effectively against Russia.
And this is a misapplication that is being deeply felt by India, isn't it, Maya?
Indeed, India is quite upset with what they view as bullying by President Donald Trump. And they did, in fact, issue a statement. The Ministry of External Affairs has issued a statement which is pretty strong. Of late, India has kept silent when it comes to demands and conditions placed by Donald Trump. But this statement actually gets very close to accusing the United States and the EU of hypocrisy. They're saying that the EU and the United States have their own trade going on with Russia. And although the EU trade has fallen in the recent past, it's still more than India does with Russia. It's also talking about India's right to get oil cheaper in order to help its domestic consumers, that it is India's right to choose who it imports oil from. And it's also talking about different issues. It's also saying very much so that if United States was actually happy earlier that India was importing oil from Russia, this was because it would kind of reduce the dependence on oil from other sources, and which might have pushed up the prices. And also because India was buying this oil from Russia at a capped price, which meant that Russia's profit on this would have been reduced. So India very unhappy indeed. The Indian opposition also targeting the government so far for being fairly quiet. And this very strong statement from the MEA coming very close to accusing the United States of hypocrisy when it comes to imposing these tariffs and potentially even higher tariffs on India because of their import of Russian oil.
You know, Maya's absolutely right. I mean, Trump is calling the tariffs on India, the potential tariffs on India, secondary tariffs. And, you know, there really is no such phrase. I mean, I think what he's doing is conflating two things, and that is secondary sanctions with tariffs. And, you know, a secondary punishment is when you're punishing somebody for doing something with somebody else. And Maya's absolutely right to point out that in India's very robust response to President Trump, India is saying that it is Europe that is buying Russian energy, and India is right. In fact, European imports of Russian LNG have recently increased. And so the primary problem here really is that Europe is still buying Russian energy. Russia is the number 2 exporter of LNG to the EU. And if you really want to sort of solve the problem at the root, it's not so much going against countries like India. It's putting pressure on the European Union to stop spending money on Russian energy that then ultimately funds the war.
Maya, this is a confusing moment for India, isn't it? Because for a very long time, it has been adhering, to two things. Firstly, an excellent relationship between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Donald Trump, which one would assume would set a good ground for any future trade relations. But secondly, India has quite a reputation for being transactional, which is something which was a word used to describe the Trump administration. But now that this conflation of trade and geopolitics comes into play, where does it leave India?
It leaves India in a very difficult situation indeed. Yes, the apparent closeness or the promoted closeness between Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump was very much highlighted by the administration here in India. They said it would definitely help when it comes to trade agreements, it would help in the Indo-US relationship, and that India would benefit from what they felt was a personal rapport even between Modi and Trump. The opposition is losing no time in kind of making fun of this and saying, well, where is this friendship now? And this statement from India, describing the increased tariffs and the potentially even higher tariffs as unjustified and unreasonable, well, that does say that the Indo-US ties are facing a little bit of turmoil now after what was a good year, a good several months indeed. The negotiation on a bilateral trade agreement has been going on. There have been 5 meetings so far. And this notice from the United States does seem to be a bit of a setback, although negotiations do still continue. And when it comes to Russia, well, of course, India has a very historical closeness with Russia. And just recently, the foreign minister spokesperson said that India and Russia have had a steady and time-tested partnership. We go back a long way with Russia, yes, for defense and for oil. Oil increasingly so, in fact, since the Ukraine war began.
Now, this closeness, Charles, plays into the deepening relationship among the so-called Brics countries, doesn't it? Brics, just to explain the background a touch, was what's set up to almost act as a counterbalance of the dominant forces of the likes of the United States. Is this resistance? Are these problems with the United States now a cue for Brazil, Russia, India, China to push ahead and to actually forge something brand new and in many ways reshape a world trade order?
I mean, it's so interesting what's happened to the acronym Brics. We have to remind ourselves that the Brics was actually an investment acronym founded and created by Goldman Sachs in the very early 2000s. And that was telling people that you should be investing in Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and latterly in South Africa, because these were emerging economies that showed promise and the world was underweighted in their investments in these countries. And what's happened is, the countries have adopted this acronym and moved on with it and created a foreign policy organization and a political and economic alliance. And you're right, Emma. So the BRICS these days are presenting themselves as an alternate system to a Western-dominated political and economic order. And so when you see these sorts of ructions between President Trump and Narendra Modi, it only throws fuel on that fire and gives the BRICS nations additional sort of impetus to say, look, we don't really need this sort of headache coming out of Washington. We can manage our own political and economic affairs better amongst ourselves. And one of those relations is the long-standing, since Soviet times, relationship between Russia and India.
And Maya, just bringing you into this on the long-term strategy for India, clearly knocked sideways by the relationship with the US in the last 6-7 months. But where is India now looking to forge its alliances? Is it going to be that, what Charles just said, that idea that looking to different partners is something that could actually create a brand new future for India, where it is not so tied to countries like the US?
I do think that you're right in that the United States may not have quite estimated properly the impact of its recent actions, whether it even comes to education, higher education. The United States was seen as the dream destination for many bright Indian students. But now with the visas and lots of restrictions there, Indian young students are looking elsewhere. And when it comes to trade as well, the kind of volatility, the kind of unpredictability of Donald Trump has made people quite unsure. There is a feeling that the goalposts are constantly shifting. And while India is far from being a very close friend to China, there have, of course, been disputes very recently as well over the border issues and other issues as well. The fact that China and India are, in a way, responding the same way to the United States over these tariffs, it does show that they are kind of going along the same path. Certainly not in a united fashion, but certainly they're responding to the United States in the same way, that you cannot tell us what to do. You cannot be instructing us who we trade with. Russia has also said that the United States has no right to say who other countries, other sovereign countries can trade with. So it is indeed making people look elsewhere. India already stopped oil imports from Iran, from Venezuela, on the United States say-so. And now it has diversified where it's getting oil from to around 40 different countries. But many countries, I think, thinking, really, where does the United States get off actually trying to instruct other countries how to trade, who to deal with, who they can be friends with, and what they owe the United States.
Maya Sharma in Bangalore and Charles Hecker here in the studio in London. Thank you both for joining us on The Globalist. We turn now to another BRICS nation under pressure from the United States. A Brazilian Supreme Court judge has ordered the former President Jair Bolsonaro to be placed under house arrest, pending the outcome of a trial on his alleged coup attempt. But the court's action was condemned by an unlikely source abroad, the United States. It has sought to sanction members of Brazil's Supreme Court if Mr. Bolsonaro isn't freed. Well, it's the latest example of the political and democratic norms being turned on their head since Donald Trump came into power in January. Dr. Kevin Casas-Zamora heads the intergovernmental group IDEA, or the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. At a recent meeting in Helsinki, he told Monocle's Chris Chermak about standing up for democracy has changed in the 30 years since IDEA was founded.
Well, it is very clear that the world has changed dramatically in the past 30 years, particularly with regards to democracy and democratic attitudes. 30 years ago, when IDEA was created in 95, it was a time of optimism for democracy, and there was this irresistible march of democracy around the world. And I guess in many ways we drew the wrong lesson, which was that this was indeed irresistible. We know better now. Building democracy and defending democracy is a daily struggle. And we are in the middle of a process that has been going on for a number of years now of visible deterioration in the quality of democratic performance all over the world. And this is a phenomenon that cuts across regions, cuts across levels of development. You know, the old notion that the problems of democracy were to be found in young and poor democracies. Well, I mean, it's obviously not true. That makes the mission of the Institute very different, and the challenges that we are facing are much more acute now, not least because support for the task of defending democracy is in some ways waning. And there are many reasons we can go into that, but the collapse of USAID that used to play a very important role in supporting democracy all over the world, supporting civil society, supporting the work and the reforms carried out by electoral commissions and political parties and so on, is a sign of the times. And it's a particularly extreme example of a broader trend. But, you know, we're trying to keep at it, and we will keep at it. Certainly, you know, we see our mission as more essential than ever.
You have spoken yourself before about the Trump effect. You mentioned USAID and the drop in foreign aid, but then there is also the rhetoric that comes with that. What kind of impact does that rhetoric have on your job?
It does have a considerable impact. Anything happening in the U.S. tends to have global ramifications, right? The kind of rhetoric that we're seeing coming out of the Trump administration, I have no doubt that it emboldens autocrats all over the world. I mean, when you hear Secretary of State Rubio saying that from now onwards, the statements that the U.S. will publish after any election anywhere in the world will focus on the interest of the United States and not whether those elections were free and fair. That's a very remarkable change in the way the U.S. states its normative priorities. So it has an impact in terms, the current rhetoric has an impact in terms of emboldening autocrats or would-be autocrats, number one. Number two, and this is perhaps even more concrete, one of the things that we've seen over the past few years emerging as a global trend is what I would call election denialism, for which the U.S. since 2016 has been ground zero. The rhetoric that in particular President Trump has spouted over the past 9 years now has gone global. And don't take my word for it. I mean, if you check some of the things that the military in Myanmar said when they canceled the election just before the coup in 2021, it was the most remarkable thing because the statements basically repeated almost verbatim some of the things that President Trump has said during and after the 2020 election in the U.S. This kind of stuff has gone global and is having a really toxic impact on the credibility of elections all over the world.
And it's not just rhetoric, though, which is what is perhaps striking. If you look at the case of Brazil, for example, there is now the sanctioning of a Supreme Court justice, for example, for their role, and other aspects actually targeting individuals as well as the threat of tariffs and so on. So it is going beyond rhetoric at this
absolutely.
point.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is, and the case of Brazil is a particularly disturbing case. I mean, it is bad in so many ways. I mean, I just can't count the ways. I mean, but the notion that a foreign power can dictate what the judiciary in a sovereign nation should do is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. And particularly considering that, and again, coming from the region, in my case, I'm from Costa Rica, I know very well, and I know some of the people directly involved in this story. Say what you will about institutions in Brazil, the judiciary in Brazil is world class. I mean, these are not quacks. I mean, these are serious people that run rings around judges in most of the world. So in a way, this is particularly egregious in the case of Brazil, because the task of the effort to bring Bolsonaro and the people that tried to subvert an election to task is seen as an existential issue for Brazilian democracy. So I find it very difficult to believe that they will compromise on this. One of the things that I find really important in the case of Brazil is that the contrast between the way in which Brazilian institutions have reacted to an attempt to subvert an election and to an attempt to attack the basic institutions of democracy, and the way in which the U.S. reacted to essentially the same kind of events, this contrast could not be more jarring. And I have a lot of respect for what Brazilian institutions have done, because one thing that we need to understand is that the first prerequisite of a democratic system is being able to defend itself. And Brazil is passing that proof with flying colors. The U.S. is failing. And I think this counts in favor of Brazil, in my view. And that makes the attack on what the judiciary is trying to do in Brazil to hold the people that tried to subvert the election to account even more egregious than it would be in any other country.
And that was Dr. Kevin Casazamora speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak in Helsinki. Still to come on today's programme.
We come to ponder a terrible force unleashed in a not-so-distant past.
Events mark the 80th anniversary of the atomic bomb being dropped in Hiroshima. We'll have more in a little while on The Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Just nudging 7:23 here in London. Let's have a look at today's newspapers. Joining me is Yossi Meckelberg, who's Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House. A very good morning to you, Yossi. How's life with you?
I mean, personally, life is good. The world is a bit different.
Okay, right. Okay, well, good life outside work.
Yes.
Happy to hear it. Right. So let's deal with the nasty stuff, the newspapers. You usually do bring in a decent catalogue of sort of pretty devastatingly bad pieces of news. Today, as ever, is no exception. There's an article in Haaretz, the left-wing paper in Israel, which is really strong at picking up on anything that Benjamin Netanyahu does to sort of try and keep him to account.
Yes, they will rather be probably being called liberal, because the left has a bad reputation for some strange reason, not with me. And this is an article by Amir Tibon, and it's interesting. He was actually on October 7. He's a very well-known journalist, but he lives in one of the communities on the border with Gaza. And it's actually his father was a major general in the army, came and rescued him from his house in Nachal Oz. And he's critical of Netanyahu, but the title of the article is Netanyahu attacks his top general as he runs out of scapegoats for Gaza failure. And I think that's, the title tells it all, is that we see one after another of the top echelon are fired. So now we understand the head of the internal security, the failure of October 7, the chief of staff. But at the end of the day, the buck never stops with Netanyahu. Whatever happens, the fact that the war goes on for 22 months, hostages are still there, the starvation in Gaza, that by itself is a terrible thing for every country to cause, but at the same time, Israel's reputation is at all-time low. And he keeps firing the defense minister, the chief of staff, the head of the internal security. And now when they are talking about, again, the absolute victory and probably a complete occupation of Gaza, then allegedly the new chief of staff, handpicked by him, and sometimes some people say with the help of his wife, Eyal Zamir. And when the IDF has reservation of going into such a move that will cost the life of more Israeli soldiers, there is even talk, including tweets by his son that sits in Miami while by young people his age are fighting in Gaza. They said that he should go too, but it's never Netanyahu's fault.
So there is a sense that this article basically in detail lists the names of those who were in some sort of ministerial role on October the 7th. And then Amir Tibon just says only one person still retains that position. And for whatever reason, they have, each one seems, no one's left, or not many have left. Most of them have been fired by Netanyahu. And the suggestion is what? That Netanyahu's run out of internal allies.
And what he's creating is an authoritarian system in which everyone is submissive, is afraid to do things. As we see dictatorships, that people are afraid to speak up their mind, even if it's for the good of the country, because and as long as you create a circle of people around you that are afraid to speak up their mind and only to keep their jobs, you retain your position, including, by the way, not only in the military. The chairman of the powerful Foreign Policy and Security Committee in the Knesset, because he was against law that will exempt ultra-Orthodox for not serving and being drafted in the army, immediately it was replaced by another sycophant. And that's the way that Netanyahu rules right now.
There's a thematic link with the next story that you want to bring to us.
Absolutely.
From the New York Times, the headline is "America will suffer from Trump's assault on facts." It is another story about a leader who chooses not to have those, who simply chooses to be surrounded by those who agree with him.
To an extent, it's even more bizarre in the title. As you say, America will suffer from Trump's assault on facts. And it just doesn't like facts. And what happened? He fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's probably, how many of us know the name of any head of a statistic agency? Probably none. And all of a sudden, the name of Erica McIntyre became a household name. She's a civil servant. She's an economist with a PhD. Only because President Trump didn't like the figures about employment and unemployment and job creation in the United States, he decided that this is rigged. Now, there is no evidence. She's not a political figure. She's someone served in different departments in the United States. And there is a real fear, because there is a similar article in the Financial Times today. If people don't trust the figures anymore, they won't invest in the United States. And if, we cast our mind a few years back, is the assault of Trump of evidence during COVID. So then it's the medical stuff. If you didn't drink bleach in order to recover from COVID, you didn't know what to do with that. And that's the kind of, it's a real assault on science, on facts, on figures, and that's unsettles people. And again, it's a way to control society. And you are always right. Even if there is not enough job creation, if Donald Trump says there is, it must be the case.
Let's move on to a story that's in The Independent here in the United Kingdom, which is a story about a Labour MP, a Member of Parliament, whose job, the last time I think I checked what a Member of Parliament does, is that he or she serves their constituents and represents them in Parliament. this Member of Parliament from Leeds, South Western Morley, if you're listening there, a very good morning to you. The UK's first virtual MP using artificial intelligence to create an AI version of someone whose job it is to serve real people.
Yeah, I mean, it was very tempting that it probably in many cases AI MP would be an improvement of the real one, but I will resist this temptation to say that. But the idea
you just said it, Yossi.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, sorry.
But the idea that you can create an AI, it works with a company that AI company talk about kind of AI revolution in which basically the AI MP, the constituents can be basically 24/7. The MP will be accessible, talking about policies, making complaints, listen to the ideas of the MPs. They try to ask this AI, some journalists try to ask about the political opinions or ideas about other MPs, but the AI MP refused to answer. But there is something in this which, again, we're all kind of gazing into the future when it comes to AI. Is it going to replace one day the real one, or is just complementing the MP in order to create constant engagement with the constituents?
I would like to see where the information that is used to create the AI MP is sourced from, given the fact that at the end of the day, AI is a tool used to actually apply knowledge which is inputted by humans into a system. So one wonders who's actually going to be writing the words for this MP.
The idea is eventually that AI could think for itself, and that's kind of the revolution. And they put it like, speak to Mark Schwartz, MP, 24/7, 365 days a year. So if you find yourself on Christmas Day really bored, and you say, what do I want to do? Let me ask and have a discussion.
At what stage does life get so bad that you're asking an AI MP for advice on Christmas Day? I don't know. Yossi Meckelbeck, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. And a quick look now at some of the other stories we're following today. Tariffs of 50% on imports to the US from Brazil have kicked in. They're some of the highest duties imposed by the Trump administration on its trading partners. Products such as coffee fall under the new scheme, but orange juice is exempt. The pro-Trump right-wing politician Karol Nawrocki will be sworn in as Poland's president today. Mr. Nawrocki was backed by the nationalist opposition party Law and Justice. It places relations with the centrist government of Donald Tusk on a collision course and could lead to potentially cooler relations with Ukraine. The UN says reports about a possible decision to expand Israel's military operations throughout the Gaza Strip are deeply alarming if true. The UN Security Council met at Israel's request with a discussion of the hostage situation in Gaza at the top of the agenda. And the former US President Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary are among a group of high-profile figures to be subpoenaed in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Pressure has been building on President Trump from his own supporters to release more information about the convicted sex trafficker Epstein, who died in prison in 2019. And those are the headlines on The Globalist. And we head to Lithuania now, where the government has resigned and the Prime Minister has stepped down. The country's finance minister is currently holding the reins until a new cabinet is formed. To bring us up to date, I'm joined on the line from Vilnius by Liudas Stapkus, who's a freelance reporter for AP News there. A very good morning to you, Liudas.
Good morning.
What's gone wrong?
What gone wrong? Wrong probably was the only decision to appoint Mr. Paluckas to this position, because apparently he had too many skeletons in his closet, and media started digging, and in midsummer's time, some of those very old stories started surfacing, and at one point. The president decided that he gives 2 weeks for a prime minister to make his mind. He left for the vacation, but during the vacation, even he didn't need those 14 days to make his mind. The police structure started, raiding some offices related to his family, and that was already the final, probably drop.
So this is the story of the Prime Minister Ginsutas Paloukas, who stepped down because of allegations of corruption. I mean, how serious were these claims about corruption?
They were rather strange because it was not like large-scale schemes that public money were taken away, but it was dealings which were kind of shady, but the general public probably mostly was shocked by the revelation that he never paid a significant part of the fine, which was allocated to them back in 2012 when he was working for Vilnius municipality, and he mishandled so-called rat poison acquisition, and when he was promoting one of the companies, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison even, but he managed to postpone this for a year or something, and then apparently he didn't pay until last July, last month, part of the fine, which was something like $19,000. And he only paid that for when the media started asking questions. Everybody was presuming that it's long gone. So, but it was just one of the stories because there's a strong media in Lithuania on investigating things, and they were putting basically every week a new story about mishandling. So that was really, really weird in a country which is 35 years independent, and stories like this weren't heard for a very long time.
And this is now leading to the departure of the entire government.
Exactly. On Monday, it was a formal step because when the prime minister steps down, probably the first time since 2004, when the prime minister had to hand the resignation, entire cabinet stepped down, and now we have this interim government until the new prime minister is announced by the president and approved by the parliament on voting.
The fact that we now have a successor likely to be chosen, today, I mean, given the fact that it appears that basically everybody from the current Lithuanian government has left, who is there to replace and to fill the gaps? And more importantly, does this go to, or will this fix the big problems of which you've just spoken?
It might fix, but the ruling Social Democratic Party, which is one of the oldest and used to be respected one, is in a deep crisis because just yesterday, the party's new chairman, Mindaugas Sinkevičius, who happens to be a mayor of one of the less known towns in Lithuania, he withdrawn his candidacy. So can you imagine the ruling party's leader says, no, sorry, I will not go for this position. I don't want to be the prime minister, after just meeting the president, who said, are you ready to move into Vilnius? So, which leaves the Social Democratic Party with only three options right now. Either real political veteran who is 69 years old, Juozas Olekas, who's been in politics forever, either two very young politicians. One of them is just 33 years old, and he just is a mayor of Vilnius district. And third candidate is Inga Ruginienė. She's acting Minister of Social Affairs and Labor, and she comes from trade unions, and she's been a member of the parliament and member of the Social Democratic Party less than a year. And she suddenly also suggested she might go for a top position in this country.
Liudas Dapkus on the line from Vilnius, and a journalist for the Associated Press there. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time is 15:38 in Hiroshima, 7:38 here in London. Now, ceremonies have been held in the Japanese city of Hiroshima to mark 80 years since an atomic bomb was first used in war. 78,000 people died instantly, with a total of 140,000 dying as a result of the attack. Well, this year's Peace Memorial ceremony saw a record participation from 120 countries and regions. I'm joined now by Jeffrey J. Hall, lecturer at Japan's Kanda University of International Studies. Good afternoon to you, Jeffrey.
Good afternoon, Emma.
Thank you for joining us. This record number of 120 countries and regions, an indication of the fact that at 80 years since the Hiroshima bomb, the threat of nuclear war, or the use of nuclear weapons, is still very much present.
Very much so. And this anniversary, the 80th, which is a special number, is also an anniversary where the number of survivors who can talk about the bombing directly is very small. And maybe by the time we get to the 90th anniversary, they won't be around anymore. So it's very important that their message, the message of what happened at Hiroshima, gets spread to the world.
The fact that those who participated, there were representatives from Taiwan, there were representatives from Palestine, and there were representatives from the United States. The fact is, it's bringing together representatives of people for whom it is now becoming more of a relevant threat than ever.
Yes, and this year the city made a significant change in that instead of inviting countries, they notified various parties. And so this allowed them to notify countries that were excluded in previous years. So Russia and Belarus were not invited since 2022. They were invited this year, or notified rather. Last year there was some controversy over the participation of Israel's embassy, but by changing it from an invitation to a notification, it allowed for as many countries as possible to participate in this ceremony.
And in this ceremony, we had a peace declaration from the mayor of Hiroshima. And within that declaration, there was a statement calling on Japan to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Japan, is it a signifier? Has it signed it and ratified it at all? If not, why not?
Well, this is a kind of sticky issue for Japan because while the mayor of Hiroshima and the mayor of Nagasaki are very vocal in their anti-nuclear messages, and Japan's own prime minister talks about the need for a world without nuclear weapons, the national security strategy of Japan relies on the deterrence provided by American nuclear weapons. So practically speaking, they don't want to become legally involved in trying to abolish nuclear weapons while there are still nuclear threats from North Korea, China, and Russia nearby. And if Japan doesn't have nuclear weapons, it's relying on the U.S. having those weapons. So they can't really go against America having nuclear weapons.
Now, how strong is the voice from within Japan of those last remaining survivors and indeed their relatives and loved ones who are saying louder than ever that nuclear deterrence is not the way? It is something from... Having spoken from experience, those people who were affected by Hiroshima, how loud are their voices?
Well, their voices are represented in the media very much. A group of them received the Nobel Peace Prize recently, but their voices are not strong enough to overcome, I think, the fears that Japanese people have towards China, towards North Korea, towards Russia. And more politicians are embracing a more military-centric foreign policy. And we could see at some point in the future this norm of Japan never having nuclear weapons erode. In the recent election, there were 14 politicians elected from a relatively new political party that has members who openly talk about Japan acquiring nuclear weapons. So it seems like this anti-nuclear message might become weaker in the future.
And indeed, in the global context of all this, I think there was a survey earlier on this year where 35% of Americans said the atomic bomb was justified. I mean, that's down from a very high number of 85% supporting the use of the atomic bomb when this survey began in 1945. Is there a sense that the rest of the world is doing its best to move away from nuclear weapons, yet is absolutely constrained by the fact that at the moment we have a very real threat from Russia, never, occasionally mentioning the threat of nuclear weapons as being something that is very real?
Well, in this case, I think that this American poll, it shows that younger generations are less likely to think that nuclear weapons being dropped on Japan was justified. But there's also In the same survey, yes, 35% said it was justified, but I think 30-something% also said they weren't sure. And I think there's a lot of people who aren't really sure, especially as history has passed and the voices of people who experienced that era are disappearing. We are in an increasingly uncertain international situation where nuclear weapons might be used at some point, and there aren't really a lot of people out there to talk about what it was like when they were used the last time in a war.
Jeffrey J. Hall, lecturer at Japan's Kanda University of International Studies, thank you for joining us on the line from Tokyo. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's have a look at the latest tech news. I'm joined now by Isabel Hamilton, UK tech editor at Politico. Good morning, Isabel. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Good to have you with us. Right, let's talk about OpenAI. We were talking a little earlier in the paper review about how a British member of Parliament wants to create an AI version, or has created an AI version of himself, just suggesting the sort of the degree to which AI is now being embraced as part of everyday life. But we have this issue of like the amount of investment that's going in and how much it is actually producing returns. It's not that profitable yet, is it?
No, it really isn't. And OpenAI yesterday released 2 what's called open weight models. They're not quite as sort of open to the public as an open source model, but they're still pretty open and they are free to download. This is a major departure for OpenAI. It's not a complete surprise. This has basically been brewing ever since the beginning of this year when we saw that Chinese company DeepSeek release its AI that was much, much cheaper to run than any of OpenAI's offerings. And it's really interesting with OpenAI specifically because they've been really trying to convert to a for-profit model. They're currently run by a non-profit because of the way they were set up, almost like a research institution. They're now obviously the household name when it comes to generative AI. You know, Google and Meta and all these giant tech companies are in the race too, but it's ChatGPT that everyone thinks of, and that's OpenAI's product. And now they've released these models that are free to download. And that's more similar now to what Meta's got with their offering. But how they're going to sort of marry this with attempts to actually even break even, not even make profits, is really interesting.
It is that difficult situation, isn't it, that you try it out. An open source of anything is always welcome because you want to see if there's a market for it. But introducing paywalls and subscription services is always going to be something that puts a business on the back foot.
Yeah, and, you know, OpenAI currently does have subscriptions, and even its most expensive one, which I think is like $200 a month, Sam Altman said they're losing money on that. They haven't actually figured out how to make it economical. And I saw that there were some very recent reports, I think, that came out in the middle of the night, that it's in talks to conduct a secondary share sale at $500 billion. That's, I think, $200 billion above the last valuation it had. So it's still trying to, you know, amp up the investment, amp up the valuation. But there's this huge question that goes sort of unanswered about how it makes money.
Let's move on to the slightly more traditional AI realm. A US AI software company has actually made a rather large amount of money.
Yeah, so this is Palantir, and Palantir's been around for a long time. I do believe they have sort of large language model product and generative AI, but they've been developing sort of, I don't want to say more basic, but more traditional AI software for a long time. And their stock is way up and they're now making over $1 billion in revenue. And that's in large part because they're just becoming an ever bigger government contractor. They sort of came to the media's attention during the first Trump administration because they worked extensively with ICE, their immigration enforcement agency, and now they've scored this big sort of it's a contract with the US Army. It's $10 billion over 10 years. It is actually a sort of amalgamation of lots of little contracts that they had, but now it's for 10 years. It's very solid. It's very stable. And yeah, their stock is up a massive amount on the Trump trade, and they're one of the more sort of stable beneficiaries of the fact that he's come back into power. And we know that they're looking at more government contracts in other countries, including the UK.
Let's move to a Scottish rocket maker. This is a sort of common story, isn't it, about tech in the United Kingdom? There are some brilliant ideas on the British Isles, but they don't necessarily have either the infrastructure or the money to make them, dare I say it, fly.
Yeah, so this is specifically about a rocket maker called Skyrora, and it won a license to launch from the UK. But as soon as it won that license, it was told that our only spacepad that we have for doing vertical launches, which is called Saxiford and is located way up north in the Shetland Islands, doesn't have any availability for them for, I think it's more than a year. And so they're going to start looking elsewhere, including on Australia. The UK's engagement in the private space industry is a funny one. The government's really keen for us to have our own launch capability. They have been for a long time. You know, it's not just this government, it's the last one as well. But it's not looking like we really have that capacity and that infrastructure, like you say. There's actually a committee in the House of Lords that's dedicated to looking into just this. And I was watching a session not long ago where they had these industry experts and these academics in who were saying, really, it's not that great of an idea for the UK to try and become a big hub for launches. We'd do much better just to focus on the R&D.
And there is that sort of question that needs to be asked here, that if you want to launch rockets and you're in Scotland, why do you not decide to find a place where there is actually something that will help you do the job? I mean, why would you want to be a rocket launcher if you didn't have anywhere to launch your rocket?
Well, I think that there's lots of places you can choose to launch your rocket from. You know, there's obviously the US, which has got a very long history of rocket launches, but there are other countries that are sort of stepping up as well, better than we are. I think places like India and in South America as well. There is a bigger appetite for this commercial space flight. And so why not be a developer, even if you haven't got a launch capability in the country that you're based in?
Isabel Hamilton, UK tech editor at Politico. Thank you for joining me on the line. You're listening to The Globalist, live on Monocle Radio. .52 in Paris, which is where we head for our final item today, because finally the story of France's recognition of its newspaper culture and of one man in particular. For 5 decades, Ali Akbar has worked as a street vendor in Paris, going from cafe to cafe, selling the day's newspapers, mostly copies of Le Monde. He's been rewarded for his efforts, with President Emmanuel Macron making him a Knight of the National Order of Merit later this year, recognising distinguished services to France in a civilian or indeed military capacity. Well, I'm joined from Paris now by Clément Gis, who's a culture editor at M Magazine Le Monde's weekly supplement. A very good morning to you, Clément.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on our programme. So just tell us a little bit more about Ali Akbar. Who is he? What's his patch and what's his style?
Well, first of all, I must say that Ali Akbar is a very famous Parisian character. I mean, every person who crosses the Quartier Latin, the late quarter where he works, knows him. Is a very joyful man. Is selling the newspaper and is very famous for his jokes. Is a neighborhood celebrity. So he goes into the restaurant selling the newspaper, and is very famous for yelling absurd news, like fake news. Like he would come into a restaurant and say Michael Jackson just woke up. Or he would say, breaking news, Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader in France, Marine Le Pen is not racist. Like he would do this kind of very absurd jokes to kind of promote the newspaper. And obviously, that's not what's on the news.
Which is,
so yeah, he's a very famous guy.
It's exactly how the French, dare I say it, sort of take their media obviously incredibly seriously, because it is a serious nation dealing with serious matters in a serious manner. But there is often that lightness of touch, that irony. It sort of goes into the French character of storytelling and of self-reflection, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But also, so Ali Akbar is from Pakistan, and he moved to France, I think, in the 70s. And he didn't start by selling Le Monde. He started by selling Charlie Hebdo, who very sadly became world famous 10 years ago. But it's Charlie Hebdo is a satirical newspaper. It has always been. So he kind of grew from that. I mean, it grew on him. This kind of satirical, ironic twist on the news, actually.
And tell us, is he successful? Do people actually buy his newspapers, or as he goes? Because he's in the Latin Quarter, isn't he? He's in Saint-Germain. He's going from, dare I say it, the sort of like the kind of rather comfortable yet intellectual crowd that sort of frequent the cafes around there. Do they actually buy his paper, or is this just something that he's seen as a representative?
Much less than a 2 decades ago. I think it says, I saw an interview of him saying that he sells around 20 or 30 copies a day, which is not a lot, because he said that in like 30 years ago he would sell like 200 copies a day. But the kind of, he's a kind of picturesque character of this neighborhood being very wealthy, being very intellectuals. There are a lot of schools, and Sciences Po, the famous French school where every politician is graduated from, is there. So he's been selling newspapers to Emmanuel Macron. I mean, to anyone from the French government has bought him a newspaper. So yeah, but I mean, he still sells newspaper, but not as much as before.
Now, this is the fact that you mentioned that he's probably sold a newspaper to Emmanuel Macron. How much does that explain the fact that President Macron will make him a Knight of the National Order of Merit? How much does this make Emmanuel Macron look good, I think, is what I'm supposed to be asking, is what I think I'm asking you.
To be honest, Emmanuel Macron absolutely loves giving awards, medals. He absolutely loves giving medals to the kind of old-style people. I mean, old French picturesque cliché stereotypes people. He absolutely loves giving a medal to someone who has been renovating a castle or something. He's really much into that kind of history, and especially when it's kind of ideal France, when Paris was the center of intellectual life. And anyway, so this is a very Emmanuel Macron move, to be honest.
Indeed. And what does this now say about where do the French get their news from now? I mean, are people still picking up newspapers, or is that the inevitable fate of scrolling that everybody seems to have fallen into?
Yeah, I mean, France is no exception, and people are reading the news online. And yes, I mean, everyone's reading the news online.
But for M Le Magazine du Monde, it's very much a paper entity, isn't it?
M is a paper, but we're actually very much developing online. I mean, even the long readings, they're being read a lot online. And to be honest about Ali Akbar, I think there's something a bit special about giving him a medal. I mean, it is a very beautiful story, but we're still talking about a 73-year-old man who still works, I think it's 15 kilometers a day to sell newspaper. And I read that he's actually doing 60 euros a day, which is nothing. I mean, it's a 73-year-old man. And so there's something good about giving an award, a medal, but in the same day, it's a sign of a very big crisis for newspapers.
Clément,
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Clément Gis, culture editor at M Magazine, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Paris. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to our producers Hassan Anderson and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Henry King. Our studio manager was Flynn Simons. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday in London. Hope you can join me for that if you can. And The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.